On the north shore of a Turkish island called Kekova, a stone staircase runs down to the water and then keeps going. You can count the steps under the surface. The street it served is down there too. That was the 2nd century, and the sea took it in an afternoon. 10 drowned cities today, and the one at number 1 took 600 years to go under. Dunwich in Suffolk. An English city with 8 churches, a mint and 2 seats in Parliament. And today it's a beach and a sonar map of what's left offshore. If you'd asked Pilgrim Lockwood what he expected to find in his nets on a September night in 1931, he'd have said herring. He was working the Lehman and Ower banks, 25 miles off the Norfolk coast, in a Lowestoft trawler called the Calinda. What came up from 120 feet down was a lump of black compressed peat, the stuff the crews called moorlog, and Lockwood took a shovel to it to break it up and throw it back over the side. The shovel hit something hard. He said later that he thought it was steel. Number 10, Doggerland, the southern North Sea. It was an antler point, just over 21 centimetres long, with a row of barbs cut down one side. It's Mesolithic. It was made for spearing fish, and it went to the museum at Norwich Castle, where it still is. A hunter dropped it on dry land. The dry land is now a fishing ground. Let's be honest about this one, because it sets the floor for everything after it. Doggerland was not a city. It was a country, a low plain of rivers, marsh and woodland that joined Britain to the Netherlands and Denmark after the last ice age, and people lived on it. As the ice melted, the sea came up and kept coming. Then, around 8,150 years ago, a huge section of the Norwegian continental shelf collapsed in the submarine landslide known as the STOREGGA slide, and the tsunami it threw across the North Sea left deposits from Greenland to Denmark, with run-ups modelled at up to 20 metres in Shetland. For a long time, that wave was the tidy ending. But research published in the journal Antiquity in 2020, led from the University of Bradford, found the tsunami sediments in the southern North Sea and read them rather differently. Parts of Doggerland came through it as an archipelago, and some of that high ground stayed above water for roughly another 1,000 years. Trawlers still bring up mammoth teeth, flint tools and lumps of moorlog from this seabed. The barbs on Lockwood's antler point are still sharp. Number 9. Vineta, the Baltic coast. Some places on this list you can swim over. This one you can only argue about. In the 1070s, the chronicler Adam of Bremen described a town at the mouth of the Oder called Jumne, and called it the greatest city in Europe, full of Slavs and Greeks and Saxon merchants. A century before him, the Andalusian traveller Ibrahim ibn Yaqub had described something similar. By the 16th century, the place had picked up a new name, Vineta, and a story to go with it, rich beyond reason, wicked with it, and drowned in a single night as punishment. Every stretch of that coast wants to be the water it drowned in. Off Kozerau, on the German island of Usedom, there's a shoal marked on the charts as the Vineta Reef, and people have been rowing out to it to listen for bells since the 1500s. A cross hanging in the village church was said to have been fished up from the sunken city, and it turned out to be Swedish wood carving from the 1700s. Divers who went down on the reef found natural rock. In 1999, the German town of Bath won the right to style itself Vineta City on the strength of a book by the Berlin archaeologist Klaus Goldmann and the journalist Gunther Vermusch, arguing that the place had stood on the mainland there. Meanwhile, on the Polish island of Wolin, excavation after excavation has turned up exactly what the chroniclers described. A major trading settlement of the 10th to 12th centuries, harbour works, tens of thousands of individual finds. The chronicler's town exists. It's on Wolin, it's above water, and archaeologists have been digging it up for a century. Number 8. Olous, Crete. Walk out along the causeway at Elunda towards the Kolokitha Peninsula, past the stone windmills and the salt pans, and the water either side of you is about a metre deep. Under it, there are walls, straight lines of dressed stone running out from the shore and stopping where the light goes. That's Olous, and it was counted among the 100 cities of Crete. It had its own treaties with Rhodes and with the inland city of Lato, and it minted its own coins, stamped with the goddess Britomartis and with Zeus Talaios. A Minoan cemetery was excavated on the site in 1937. Out on the peninsula, there's the floor of an early Christian basilica with its mosaic still in place. Fish and birds worked into the pattern, sitting in the open air a short walk from a city that isn't. Nobody sacked Olous. Crete sits on the boundary between two tectonic plates, and it does not move as one piece. The west end of the island has been lifting. The east end, where Olous is, has been going the other way. Survey work by the Greek Ephorate of underwater antiquities has traced building foundations, roads, and a Hellenistic defensive wall and tower out under the shallows, and the subsidence that put them there is usually dated to somewhere around the 2nd century after Christ. It's a protected archaeological site, which in practice means you may snorkel over it and you may not touch it or drop an anchor on it. On a still morning, the outlines are sharp enough to photograph from the surface. Number 7. Simena, Kekova, Turkey. This is the staircase from the start of the video, so let's go and stand at the top of it. The village above the water is Kalakoi. No road reaches it. You arrive by boat or on foot, under a Lycian necropolis, and a castle the Knights of Rhodes rebuilt. And in the shallows, just off the shore, a stone sarcophagus stands up out of the sea with its lid still on. The ancient town here was Simena, and it belonged to the Lycian League, a federation of city-states on this coast that voted in proportion to the size of each member, which is a very early version of an idea most of Europe took another 1800 years to get round to. Simena traded, built ships, and cut its tombs into the rock above the harbour. Then, in the 2nd century after Christ, a sequence of earthquakes dropped the coastline. Not the whole town, which is the strange part. The half on the mainland is still lived in. The half along the north shore of Kekova Island went down and stayed down. And what's under there is house walls, doorways, cisterns, keystones, and those staircases sitting 3 to 6 meters below the surface in water clear enough to read through. The whole seascape is a Turkish special environmental protection area. Swimming over the ruins is illegal, diving on them is illegal, and the fines are real. Boats take you across at a crawl, and that is as close as anyone gets. So the staircase is safe for now, which is more than the next one managed. Number 6. Pavlopetri, Laconia, Greece. Off Pounta Beach, across a narrow channel from the island of Elafonisos, there's a town plan lying in 3 meters of water. Streets, courtyards, at least 15 buildings with their rooms still legible, and graves cut into the rock at the edge of the settlement. A Greek geologist called Phokion Negris noticed something down there in 1904, and nobody followed it up. It was found again in 1967 by Nicholas Fleming of the Institute of Oceanography, who was studying ancient sea levels, and the following year a Cambridge team spent 6 weeks in the water mapping it with a fixed grid and hand tapes. Then everybody went away for 40 years. If you're enjoying these, hit subscribe, because there's a drowned coastline like this for almost every country in Europe, and we're working through them. There's one more Mediterranean city coming, and then this list turns north and gets colder. And the last 4 all belong to the same sea. By 2009, a joint project between the University of Nottingham, the Hellenic Centre for Marine Research, and the Ephorate of Underwater Antiquities was back on the site with digital survey kit. They recorded the 30,000 square meters already known and found more than 9,000 square meters nobody had mapped, including a large rectangular hall and a whole street lined with buildings. The pottery they lifted pushed the occupation back to around 3,500 years before Christ, which makes Pavlopetri the oldest submerged town yet found anywhere in the world. It went under gradually, through earthquake and rising sea, by about 1,000 years before Christ. It's a protected site now. For 4 of the decades in between, it was lying unguarded in 3 meters of water with boats anchoring on top of it. Number 5. Baiae, the Bay of Naples. Rome's rich did not go to the Amalfi Coast. They came here, to a resort built over volcanic vents on the north shore of the bay, with hot springs plumbed straight into private bathhouses. Cicero had a place. So did Julius Caesar. Nero inherited a villa from Claudius, and if Tacitus and Suetonius are to be believed, took a keen interest in acquiring his neighbours as well. Today, you go over it in a glass-bottomed boat, or you dive it. About 5 meters down off Punta Epitafio, there's the Nymphaeum of the Emperor Claudius, a rectangular dining room with statue niches down both long sides, and among the statues recovered from it is one of Antonia Minor, Claudius's mother. From there, a paved road, the Via Herculania, runs on across the seabed, past bathhouses and the mosaic floors of the Villa a Protiro. The bay sits inside the Campi Flegrei caldera, and the ground here does something most ground doesn't. It breathes. The Italians call it bradicismo, bradicism, the slow rise and fall of the surface as the magma chamber underneath fills and empties. From the 4th century after Christ, the coast at Baiae went down, and kept going down, and the lower half of the most fashionable address in the Roman world ended up under about 6 meters of water. The Italian state made the bay a marine protected area in 2002 with 8 dive sites between 5 and 13 meters. And the ground is currently rising again. Whether that ever hands any of Baiae back is a question the volcanologists are watching closely, for reasons that have very little to do with archaeology. Number 4. Old Winchelsea, Sussex. You can visit Winchelsea. You can walk its grid of streets, look at the medieval wine cellars under the houses, and stand in a parish church built for roughly 10 times the 600 people who live there now. What you cannot visit is Old Winchelsea, because the town those people came from is out in Rye Bay, under the water. Old Winchelsea sat on a shingle bank, and the old name for it meant more or less the Shingle Isle, so nobody can claim they weren't warned. It was one of the great ports of the south coast, attached to the Cinque Ports, and it ran the wine trade with Gascony. In 1250, a storm destroyed more than 300 houses in a night. Henry III and his son took that seriously enough to start planning a replacement town on the hill at Eham, inland and well above the harbour. They were too slow. In February 1287, a storm came up the channel that rewrote the coastline from Kent to Sussex, and Old Winchelsea did not survive it. The same storm collapsed a cliff at Hastings, took part of the castle with it, and blocked that harbour, and pushed the River Rother out of New Romney and into Rye, so Edward I finished what his father had started. The new Winchelsea went up from 1288 on a bastide grid copied from Gascony, 40 squares of 2¼ acres each, one of the earliest planned towns in England, and by 1292 the survivors had moved in. The rescue worked and the town died anyway, because within 2 centuries the new harbour silted up as thoroughly as the old one had drowned. 30 of those 40 squares can still be traced in the lanes. The 3 places left on this list were all hit by the same storm. One of them then took another 500 years to finish dying. Number 3. Rungholt, North Frisia, Germany. To reach Rungholt you walk. The site is out in the Wadden Sea near the little island of Hallig Sudfall, and the team working it carries its equipment across the mudflats on foot, more than an hour each way, between tides. This is the most famous drowning in Germany. On the night of the 16th of January, 1362, a storm surge came in off the North Sea and broke the dikes along the whole Frisian coast. The Germans and the Dutch call it the Grote Mandrenke, the Great Drowning of Men. An entire administrative district, Edam-Shard, went under with its parishes, and Rungholt was its trading town. For 6 centuries after that, it was mostly a moral fable. Rungholt got rich. Rungholt got arrogant. God drowned Rungholt. Historians were fairly confident there had been a town out there. Nobody could say where. This is where it stops being a fable. In May of 2023, a German research foundation project, run jointly by Kiel University, the University of Mainz, the Archaeology Centre at Schleswig, and the State Archaeology Service of Schleswig-Holstein, dragged magnetic gradiometers across the mudflats and mapped a 2-kilometre chain of terps, the artificial mounds people built to live on out there. On one of them, the geophysics picked out the foundations of a church, 40 metres by 15. The team published the reconstruction in the journal Scientific Reports. And the reason it drowned is not divine in the slightest. The people there dug the peat out from under their own fields for salt and for fuel. The ground sank as they did it, and the sea came in over land they had lowered themselves. Twice a day, the tide goes out, and you can stand on the footprint of that church. Number 2. Ravenser Odd, the Humber. Right at the start of this, there was a staircase that went under in an afternoon. Ravenser Odd is that speed, and it's the only place on this list nobody has managed to find. It grew on a sandbank at the mouth of the Humber in the middle of the 13th century, founded by the Count of Aumale on ground the river had only just made. By 1299, it had more than 100 houses and a borough charter. It had wharves, warehouses, a court and a prison. It took dues from more than 100 merchant ships a year. It was a busier port than Hull, just up the estuary. And in 1295, it sent 2 members to the model parliament. The chroniclers of Meaux Abbey wrote most of this down, including what came next. The crown granted the town money to repair its quay in 1329, and again in 1333, 1335, 1340, 1344, and 1347. An inquisition in 1346 recorded that 2/3 of Ravenser Odd had already gone, and that only 1/3 of the townspeople were left. The Meaux Chronicle describes the chapel and most of the buildings of the town destroyed as the sea and the Humber rose higher than usual, and bodies coming out of the burial ground. The storms of the winter of 1356 flooded what remained, and the town was abandoned. The surge of January 1362, the same one that took Rungholt, finished the site off. In 2021 and 2022, Professor Daniel Parsons of the University of Hull took high-resolution sonar out past Spurn Point to look for it, prompted in part by lobster fishermen reporting obstructions on the seabed. He surveyed 10 hectares, came back with nothing, and told The Guardian he thought he'd been searching slightly too far east. A town with a prison, a parliament seat, and 100 ships a year, and nobody can currently put a pin in the map. Number 1, Dunwich, Suffolk. There's a car park, a beach, a pub, and a row of houses. That's Dunwich. Fewer than 200 people live in the parish, and the North Sea is a short walk away over a bank of shingle. In the 12th and 13th centuries, this was one of the largest ports in England. The Domesday Survey of 1086 lists 3 churches and a population somewhere around 3,000, and it grew from there into a walled town with 8 churches, houses of 2 religious orders, hospitals, a guild hall and a mint. It sent 2 members to Parliament. Its customs house took more in duty than Newcastle. The Anglo-Saxon bishopric of Dommoc was placed here for centuries by almost everyone who wrote about it, and the Church of England revived the title Bishop of Dunwich in 1934, although historians now argue the original see was somewhere else entirely. And all of it stood on a cliff of sand and clay, which is a material with opinions about the future. The end took 6 centuries, and it arrived in installments. On the 1st of January, 1286, a storm surge came over the east side of the town and destroyed buildings. The February after that came the storm that killed old Winchelsea, and, in December of the same year, St. Lucia's flood. Crown tax receipts from Dunwich fell from £108 a year to £14. A storm in 1328 blocked the harbour for good and shifted the river north towards Walberswick. Another in 1347 took about 400 houses. Then 1362, and the same great drowning that had already taken Ravenser, Odd and Rungholt. After that, it was erosion, church by church, century by century. All Saints, the last of the 8, was abandoned in 1758, though people went on burying their dead in its churchyard into the 1820s. The cliff edge reached the churchyard in 1904. Photographers came out year after year to shoot the tower on its shrinking ledge, and in 1922 it went over onto the beach and took the graves with it. One buttress was carried inland and stood up in the churchyard of the village church, where it is today. The rest of the headstones went over the edge one at a time. A stone to a man named John Brinkley Easy fell in the early 1990s. One is left. It reads, "In memory of Jacob Forster, who departed this life March the 12th, 1796, aged 38. It stands a few feet back from the drop in the trees near the Greyfriars ruins, and there's a sign beside it warning that the cliff here is high and dangerous. The town itself is offshore, and it has been mapped." Stuart Bacon began diving the site in the 1970s in near zero visibility and located All Saints on the seabed. In 2008, he joined Professor David Sear of Southampton and an acoustic imaging survey for English Heritage, and what they published was a street map of a town covering 1.8 square kilometres, about the area of the City of London, with the ruins of Blackfriars, St Peter's, All Saints, St Nicholas, and the Chapel of St Catherine identifiable on the bottom. Peter Murphy of English Heritage said afterwards that the surprise was how much of the eroded town was still down there and still recognisable. So the bells are a story. The town is not. That's the thing this list keeps doing to you. We're used to a drowned city being a legend with a moral bolted on, and most of these come with a survey report instead. Doggerland has sediment cores and an antler point in a museum case. Rungholt has a church plan. Pavlopetri has a street map. Even Vineta, the one that really is a folk tale, has a genuine trading city underneath it, above water, on an island in Poland. Which brings us back to that staircase on Kekova. I don't think it's a symbol of anything, personally. Somebody's mason cut those treads to suit the local shin. Somebody walked up them, carrying the shopping. And then the ground moved, and the sea came in over the top and never left. 9 more like it today. Most of them protected. All of them findable, except the one that's still officially missing off the coast of Yorkshire. Subscribe and we'll go and find the next 10. Thank you.